Buddhist pharmacies, called Dhanvantari Grihas in the Sanskrit texts, were among the most sophisticated medical institutions in the ancient world. They predated Greek hospitals by centuries. They predated the first European medical schools by a millennium, and they served entire civilizations. Here is something almost nobody in the modern history of medicine talks about. The herbs stocked in these pharmacies were not chosen by tradition alone. The Charaka Samhita describes selection criteria for medicinal herbs with a precision that reads like a modern pharmaceutical specification document. Potency, preparation method, dosage, contraindications, combination synergies, all documented, all now being validated by modern clinical research. These were not folk remedies. These were the institutional medicines that kept the populations of vast Asian empires healthy across centuries, when European populations were dying in the streets from infections that monastery pharmacies routinely cured. Stay with me, because number 5 was so revered that it received the same name in Sanskrit as the divine nectar of immortality. And number 1 was prescribed daily, without exception, by Ayurvedic physicians for 2,500 years. 10 herbs from the monastery pharmacy. The science that explains why every single one of them actually worked. Number 10. Brahmi. Bacopa monnieri, the empire's memory herb. The Charaka Samhita does not assign rankings lightly, but it ranks Brahmi as the number 1 Medhya Rasayana, the premier brain herb in the entire Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia. This designation made Brahmi the most prescribed cognitive medicine across the Maurya and Gupta empires for nearly 1,000 years. Royal scribes who needed to memorize court records were given it. Buddhist scholars who memorized tens of thousands of lines of scripture were given it. Court physicians who needed sustained cognitive performance during medical training were given it. The herb was institutional infrastructure. Read that again slowly. A single plant, prescribed across an entire civilizational scholarship system for over 1,000 years of sustained intellectual production. That tells you everything about how Brahmi was valued. It was not a wellness herb. It was the cognitive infrastructure of 2 empires. Modern neuroscience has now identified the mechanism with precision. Brahmi's active compounds are bacosides A and B. They physically repair damaged dendrites, the branching extensions of neurons through which memory signals travel. And they promote new synaptic branching in healthy neurons. This is structural repair of the brain's physical architecture. 12 double-blind clinical trials confirm improved memory recall, processing speed, and reduced anxiety after consistent use. The full effect requires 8 to 12 weeks. The trial timelines mirror exactly how the ancient empires prescribed the herb. Before anyone had a word for synaptic plasticity, Buddhist pharmacies were rebuilding it across an entire continent. 3 ways to use it. Take Brahmi daily with fat. Bacosides are fat-soluble, and absorption without fat is significantly reduced. Use it for a minimum of 8 to 12 weeks before evaluating effects. Patience is part of the protocol. Combine with ghee and warm milk before bed. The classical preparation that maximized absorption. 2 empires ran on this herb. Modern neuroscience is finally explaining why. Number 9. Ashwagandha. Withania somnifera, the cortisol master. The Sushruta Samhita gives ashwagandha a name reserved for almost no other herb. The stallion herb. The herb that grants the strength and vitality of a horse. This was not a poetic flourish. It was the institutional designation that made ashwagandha the standard adaptogenic medicine of the ancient world. Royal generals took it before military campaigns. Court physicians prescribed it to officials managing the chronic stress of administering vast empires. Buddhist monks took it nightly to recover from the physical demands of meditation, fasting, and pilgrimage. For over 2,000 years, this single root was the most prescribed stress recovery medicine in the Buddhist world. Read that again slowly. A medicine institutionally prescribed across military, governmental, and religious sectors of multiple ancient civilizations. That tells you everything about how ashwagandha was valued. It was not a tonic. It was the empire's stress recovery infrastructure. Modern endocrinology explains the mechanism precisely. The active compound is withafferin A. It reduces cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, by up to 30% in clinical trials. It inhibits NF-kappa B, the master inflammatory pathway that drives most chronic disease. And it does this through direct action on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the central command system for the entire human stress response. But here is the detail almost nobody mentions. Ashwagandha works on the body's natural cortisol rhythm. Cortisol peaks in the morning and declines through the evening, reaching its lowest point at night. Ashwagandha taken at night reinforces that natural decline. Ashwagandha taken in the morning fights against the natural cortisol peak. The ancient prescription was always nightly, in warm milk, before bed. The chronobiology was correct 2,000 years before chronobiology existed as a science. 3 ways to use it. Simmer 1 teaspoon of ashwagandha root powder in warm milk for 15 minutes before bed. The exact monastery preparation. Take 300 to 500 milligrams of standardized extract in the evening. Use it consistently for at least 8 weeks. The cortisol reduction trials require this minimum window. The Empire's stress medicine, now in your kitchen. Number 8. Shatavari, Asparagus racemosus, the hormone adapter. The Charaka Samhita designates Shatavari as the premier rasayana for hormonal preservation across the lifespan. In the ancient empires, this made Shatavari the standard medicine prescribed to court figures, both male and female, who needed to maintain functional vitality into advanced age. The herb had a reputation as a women's tonic that has obscured the historical record. In the actual ancient Buddhist pharmacy, Shatavari was prescribed across all genders. For elderly officials whose bone density was declining. For court figures whose skin was losing moisture and elasticity. For senior monks whose hormonal balance was shifting with age. The herb was the institutional response to the hormonal decline of aging. Read that again slowly. A single herb, prescribed across both sexes, for the systemic preservation of hormonal function into advanced age across the entire Buddhist medical world. That tells you everything about how Shatavari was valued. It was not a women's herb. It was the empire's universal hormonal preservation medicine. Modern endocrinology has now identified the mechanism. The active compounds are saponins called shatavarins. Shatavarins are estrogen receptor modulators. They do not increase estrogen production. They modulate the activity of existing estrogen receptors, allowing the body to maintain optimal hormonal signaling even as natural production declines with age. Clinical studies confirm anti-aging effects across the entire hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Bone density is preserved. Skin moisture is maintained. Sleep quality improves. Cognitive function is supported. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. The benefits compound with daily use over years. This is not an acute intervention. It is a long-term hormonal maintenance protocol. Before anyone had a word for estrogen receptor modulation, Ayurvedic pharmacies were achieving it through one route. 3 ways to use it. Take 1 teaspoon of Shatavari powder in warm milk daily. The classical preparation. Use it consistently for at least 6 months to evaluate the full effect. Patience is required. Combine with ashwagandha for a complete HPA axis preservation protocol. The 2 herbs were often paired in the monastery pharmacy. The empire's hormonal medicine, now confirmed by modern endocrinology. Number 7. Gotu Kola, Centella asiatica, the triple anti-ager. The Charaka Samhita describes Gotu Kola as the premier herb for intelligence and longevity of the brain simultaneously. In the empire pharmacies, this dual designation made it institutional infrastructure. Court advisors took it for cerebral function. Soldiers took it for wound healing after battle. Elderly officials took it for skin elasticity and joint mobility. The herb worked in all 3 contexts because it operated through one mechanism that affected 3 tissues simultaneously. This was extraordinarily rare in the ancient pharmacopoeia. Read that again slowly. A single herb prescribed across military, governmental, and personal health contexts because it produced beneficial effects in 3 different tissue systems at the same time. That tells you everything about how Gotu Kola was valued. It was not a wellness herb. It was the empire's universal anti-aging medicine. Modern analysis explains the mechanism. The active compound is asiaticoside. Asiaticide promotes type 1 collagen synthesis simultaneously in 3 tissues: skin, joints, and cerebral blood vessels. This is the triple anti-aging action that no other plant on Earth replicates. Most collagen-supporting compounds work in 1 tissue. Gotu Kola works in 3. Studies in elderly populations show measurably reduced cognitive decline and improved skin elasticity after consistent use. Studies in soldiers historically showed dramatically reduced wound healing time. Modern wound healing research has confirmed Asiaticide-based treatments reduce wound healing time by up to 56% compared to controls. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. Higher doses do not produce stronger effects. The collagen pathway saturates. The ancient prescription was 3 fresh leaves daily. This was the dose at which all 3 tissues respond optimally. 3 ways to use it. Eat 3 fresh Gotu Kola leaves daily if available. The original and most bioavailable preparation. Use 500 milligrams of standardized extract if leaves are unavailable. Take it long term. The benefits build over months, not days. The Empire's triple anti-ager. Now confirmed across modern wound healing and longevity research. Number 6. Neem. Azadirachta indica. The 200-study antimicrobial. The Charaka Samhita lists neem in more antimicrobial formulations than any other single plant. This designation made neem the institutional broad-spectrum antimicrobial of the entire ancient Buddhist medical world. Royal palaces had neem trees planted in their courtyards specifically because the air around them was understood to be cleaner. Hospitals stored neem leaves, neem bark, and neem oil as standard inventory. Soldiers carried neem oil in their travel kits for wound infections. The herb was empire-scale infrastructure. Read that again slowly. A single tree, used so consistently across the medical institutions of multiple civilizations that royal palaces grew it in their courtyards. That tells you everything about how neem was valued. It was not an herb. It was the broad-spectrum antibiotic of the ancient world. Modern microbiology has now confirmed every aspect of the ancient use. Over 200 published studies have demonstrated neem's antimicrobial activity. The primary active compounds are nimbidin and nimbolide. Together, they show measurable activity against gram-positive bacteria, gram-negative bacteria, fungi, viruses, and malaria parasites. In 200 studies, across multiple research institutions. Confirmed independently. This is one of the broadest spectrums of antimicrobial activity ever documented for a single plant. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. The classical monastery practice of chewing fresh neem leaves at dawn was both delivery and dosing. The active compounds are most concentrated when the leaves are fresh and the cellular structure is intact. The morning chew was a daily prophylactic dose. 3 ways to use it. Chew 3 to 5 fresh neem leaves at dawn on an empty stomach. The classical prophylactic dose. Apply neem oil topically to skin infections, wounds, and fungal conditions. Brew bark or leaf decoction for gut infections. Use therapeutically. 200 published studies. 1 ancient tree. The Empire's antibiotic. We are halfway through. Every herb remaining was institutional medicine for the largest civilizations of ancient Asia. If this is landing for you, subscribe right now. We post every single week. Now, number 5, Giloy. Tinospora cordifolia, also called Guduchi, the divine nectar defender. The Charaka Samhita gives Giloy a name reserved for almost no other herb in the entire Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia. Amrita, the divine nectar of immortality. This name appears in the texts in the same sentences used to describe substances of the highest possible medicinal value. In the Empire pharmacies, this designation made Giloy the standard prophylactic herb administered to entire populations during epidemic outbreaks. When fevers swept through cities or monastic communities, Giloy was the prescription. But the use was preventive. The herb was given to healthy people specifically to prevent infection during outbreaks. This is one of the earliest documented examples of population-level preventive medicine in human history. Read that again slowly. A medicine distributed at population scale to prevent disease before it occurred in communities that documented their epidemic outcomes across generations. That tells you everything about how Giloy was valued. It was not an immune supplement. It was the empire's epidemic prevention infrastructure. Modern immunology has identified the mechanism. Giloy contains alkaloids related to berberine. These alkaloids activate macrophages and natural killer cells, the immune system's first responders to infection, while simultaneously demonstrating direct antibacterial action. This is a dual mechanism. The herb both strengthens the immune response and directly attacks pathogens. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. The ancient texts specified the use of fresh Giloy stem juice during epidemic seasons. The fresh juice contains the highest concentration of active alkaloids. Drying degrades them somewhat. The empire pharmacies kept fresh Giloy stems in active cultivation specifically for epidemic season pressing. 3 ways to use it. Press fresh Giloy stem juice and consume 30 milliliters daily during cold and flu season, the traditional epidemic season prescription. Use standardized powder when fresh herb is unavailable, 500 milligrams to 1 gram daily. Combine with Tulsi for a complete immune enhancement protocol. The 2 herbs were often paired. The empire's epidemic medicine, confirmed by modern immunology. Number 4. Shankhpushpi, Convolvulus pluricalis, the forgotten acetylcholine booster. Shankhpushpi has the longest documented institutional record of any cognitive herb in the Ayurvedic canon. It appears across multiple separate Sanskrit texts, referenced consistently across centuries of monastic scholarship. In the ancient empires, the herb was prescribed for one specific institutional purpose: the preservation of cognitive function in elderly officials. When senior court advisors began to lose recall and concentration, when elderly Buddhist scholars began to slip in their ability to memorize and recite, when aging royal physicians began to forget formulations they had once mastered, the prescription was Shankhpushpi. Read that again slowly. A specific medicine, institutionally prescribed for the cognitive decline of senior officials in civilizations that depended on the sustained mental function of their elders. That tells you everything about how Shankhpushpi was valued. It was not a memory herb. It was the empire's anti-dementia protocol. Modern neuroscience has identified the mechanism. The alkaloids and flavonoids in Shankhpushpi inhibit acetylcholinesterase. Acetylcholinesterase is the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine in the synapse. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter of memory and learning. In Alzheimer's disease, acetylcholine levels collapse. Pharmaceutical drugs currently approved for Alzheimer's, including donepezil and rivastigmine, work by exactly this mechanism: acetylcholinesterase inhibition. Shankhpushpi is now being studied in direct comparison with these pharmaceutical drugs. Before anyone had a word for acetylcholinesterase, Buddhist pharmacies were inhibiting it with a flowering vine. 3 ways to use it. Take fresh juice of the plant in the morning on an empty stomach, the classical preparation. Use standardized powder or extract, widely available with a long safety record. Combine with Brahmi for dual cognitive support. The 2 herbs appear paired in multiple ancient texts. The pharmaceutical industry calls this mechanism a breakthrough. The monastery called it Tuesday. Number 3. Andrographis, Kalmegh, the 5-day killer. The Charaka Samhita's premier herb for fever and acute infection. In the empire pharmacies, Andrographis was the standard emergency response to febrile illness. When monks contracted dangerous fevers, when soldiers developed wound-related sepsis, when royal officials contracted infectious disease, Andrographis was the prescription. Always for a 5 to 7 day course. Never longer, never preventively. This was therapeutic, not prophylactic. Read that again slowly. A specific medicine, prescribed for a specific number of days, for specific acute infections, with prescribing guidelines that read like modern antibiotic stewardship protocols, written 2,000 years ago. That tells you everything about how Andrographis was valued. It was not a wellness supplement. It was the empire's emergency infection medicine. Modern pharmacology has identified the mechanism. The compound is andrographilide. It is one of the most broadly studied natural antimicrobials in modern published research. Andrographilide has demonstrated activity against MRSA, the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus that defeats modern antibiotics. It has shown activity against influenza, malaria parasites, and in laboratory studies, the HIV virus. But the most important property is the mechanism. Andrographilide does not work through a single pathway. It disrupts multiple pathogen mechanisms simultaneously, which makes resistance development extremely difficult. Most modern antibiotics target one mechanism. Bacteria evolve around it. Andrographilide hits multiple targets at once. Before anyone had a word for multi-pathway antimicrobial resistance, Ayurvedic physicians had identified the herb that solved it. 3 ways to use it. Brew bitter decoction at the first sign of acute infection. Use it for 5 to 7 days only. This is therapeutic, not preventive. Combine with raw honey to mask the bitterness. Honey adds its own antimicrobial action. The 5-day killer, now confirmed across modern antimicrobial research. Number 2. Licorice root, Yashti Madhu, the antiviral empire herb. The Charaka Samhita lists licorice in over 70 antimicrobial formulations. 70. This is one of the highest formulation counts for any single herb in the entire Ayurvedic canon. In the empire pharmacies, licorice was the standard medicine for respiratory infections that swept through dense urban populations. When seasonal respiratory illness moved through Maurya cities, when monastic communities suffered through the seasonal coughs that could turn into pneumonia, when royal officials contracted the persistent infections that compromised their work, licorice was the prescription, the institutional respiratory medicine of the entire Buddhist world. Read that again slowly. A single herb, used in over 70 formulations, prescribed across the largest civilizations of ancient Asia, for the respiratory infections that accompanied dense urban living. That tells you everything about how licorice was valued. It was not a flavoring. It was the empire's antiviral infrastructure. Modern virology has now confirmed every aspect of the ancient use. The active compound is glycyrrhizin. Glycyrrhizin has documented antiviral activity against hepatitis B, hepatitis C, herpes simplex, influenza A and B, and in laboratory settings, the SARS coronavirus family. Multiple viruses, one compound. And it prevents bacterial biofilm formation, the defense structures that make chronic infections resistant to treatment. By preventing biofilm formation, licorice keeps acute respiratory infections from becoming chronic. Before anyone had a word for antiviral medication, Buddhist pharmacies were prescribing one. 3 ways to use it. Brew licorice root decoction during respiratory infections. Steep 1 teaspoon of dried root in hot water for 10 minutes. Use it therapeutically, not daily. Pure licorice in high doses can affect blood pressure. Use deglycyrrhizinated licorice if daily use is desired. This form removes the blood pressure effect while preserving most other benefits. 70 formulations. 1 root. Empire scale antiviral medicine. Number 1. Amla. Amalaki. The daily non-negotiable. The Charaka Samhita's closing statement on the entire Rasayana category is unequivocal. Of all fruits, Amalaki is the best. Not one of the best, the best. In the empire pharmacies, this designation made Amla the only herb prescribed daily, without exception, for life. Every monk took it. Every court physician recommended it. Every Ayurvedic pharmacy stocked it as the foundational medicine that everything else was built upon. For 2,500 years, this single fruit was the most consistent prescription in the entire Buddhist medical world. Read that again slowly. A specific food prescribed daily without variation by the institutional medical infrastructure of multiple civilizations for 2.5 millennia. That tells you everything about how Amla was valued. It was not a fruit. It was the foundational medicine of the entire Buddhist pharmacopoeia. Modern science has confirmed the designation through multiple lines of evidence. Amla contains amblycanins A and B, vitamin C precursors that are heat stable, unlike the ascorbic acid in citrus fruits. The ORAC antioxidant capacity is 17 times that of blueberries. Tannins in Amla directly inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the same mechanism as pharmaceutical Alzheimer's drugs. The fruit is simultaneously neuroprotective, hepatoprotective, telomere protective, and cardiovascular protective. One fruit, multiple major systems, confirmed across decades of modern research. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. The compounds remain active even after cooking and drying. This is why Amla could be distributed across the entire ancient Buddhist world without losing potency. The chemistry made the institutional prescription possible. 3 ways to use it. Eat 1 fresh Amla daily if accessible. The traditional, non-negotiable. Take Chyawanprash, the prepared Amla paste, when fresh fruit is unavailable. The classical alternative used across the ancient world. Combine with ghee and black pepper for full antioxidant absorption. The fat-soluble compounds need fat for utilization. The empire's foundational medicine. The monks called it the best. Modern science is finally confirming the designation. These 10 herbs were not random selections from a garden. They were the result of thousands of years of systematic clinical observation in communities large enough to produce meaningful data. The monks were running longitudinal studies. They just called it medicine. The empires that depended on these herbs maintained population health at scales that European medicine would not match for over 1,000 years. Modern pharmacology is finally arriving at the same conclusions, one trial at a time. Drop a comment below and tell me which herb surprised you most. Subscribe and hit the bell. We post every week and we are just getting started. The next video goes even deeper.